Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here after what must have been a day of inspiring talks. It's great to be here. So I'm not an economist. I'm a former emergency doctor and GP, as you've heard, and I've got a master in public health. So when I became a politician in 2022, trust in me as a politician plummeted. Sorry, as a professional plummeted. But it also means I have a strong interest in the health and well-being of current and future generations, which I'll be leaning in today. In February this year, I introduced a bill called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill. And why did I do this? Well, because for the first time in modern history, our children will be worse off than their parents, and centuries of progress are being undone. Our children and future generations of Australians will inherit a world facing converging and connected crises that we, the current generation of leaders, policymakers and economists, are responsible for. Climate breakdown, environmental destruction that would have been unimaginable 50 years ago, an extinction crisis, a housing crisis where the dream of owning your own home has become nothing more than a pipe dream for many, epidemics of depression, anxiety, obesity, type 2 diabetes, plastics filling our oceans. The gambling industry has infiltrated the everyday lives of our children, increasing poverty, growing inequality, oh my goodness, and growing intergenerational inequality. It is the era of the polycrisis. And these things, these multiple disasters, have not happened overnight. Each of them has been decades in the making. So today you've heard a number of presentations from experts about various aspects of tax reform that would provide common sense solutions to many of these what are seemingly vexed and intractable problems. So you've heard about carbon pricing, coal royalties, housing tax reform, and a 25% petroleum resource tax on our gas exports. So the big question is, why aren't these being adopted? They sound really reasonable. So today I just would like to share with you some of my reflections on the political and systemic barriers that are holding back meaningful tax and revenue reform, and how this can be addressed by implementing the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill. But firstly, I'll touch on another piece of health policy that I've been calling for, and that's I've been calling for increasing investment in preventive health. A move that would dramatically improve the health of Australians and save the Australian healthcare system billions of dollars. But again, it's not on the horizon. Every dollar invested in preventive health saves over $14 in healthcare and other costs. And failing to invest in prevention comes at a cost, both in terms of our health and our wealth. Preventable, non-communicable conditions such as cardiovascular disease, cancers, diabetes are the biggest killers in Australia, making up to 85% of the disease burden here and contributing to 9 in 10 deaths. They also contribute to over half of Australia's hospitalisations and cost the government approximately $82 billion a year. People with chronic diseases are 60% more likely to not participate in the labour force, which will cost Australia around $67 billion by 2030. The important thing to note is much of this is avoidable. In 2024, over 1/3 of the total burden of disease in Australia could have been prevented by reducing exposure to modifiable risk factors. Despite this, Australia has one of the lowest levels of investment in preventive health of any OECD nation. Currently, Australia allocates around 2% of our health budget to prevention, accounting for roughly 0.2% of the GDP. This is a fraction of what the UK and Canada dedicate to illness prevention, and they are at 5 to 6% and 7 to 8% respectively. And right now, the negotiations over the 5-year funding arrangements for hospitals across the country have stalled, with the state and territory leaders saying that the amount that the Commonwealth is offering is billions short of what is required. So the Australian government health spending is also forecasted to grow from 4.2% of GDP in 22-23 to 6.2% in 2060s. So despite these growing costs, and these obviously growing costs, comprehensive prevention strategies such as the National Preventive Strategy, Health Prevention Strategy, National Obesity Strategy remain unfunded, unimplemented and unloved, gathering dust on the minister's shelf. Why? Well, because the benefits of investment in prevention are long-term benefits, and we are sadly stuck in a cycle of short-termism. Higher preventive health spending would not only have significant health benefits for Australians, but it's also sound financial management. And this is just one example of fiscal policy that can help build a better society. And we've heard of many others throughout the day. Clearly, the ideas are there. So what's holding us back? Well, firstly, there's a lack of long-term thinking. With the pressure to get re-elected every 3 years, ministers are rewarded for delivering visible, near-term wins on their own portfolios and not for contributing to the whole of government reform that might take years to bear fruit. Secondly, there's the siloed portfolios. Our political system is structured around portfolio silos, each operating with its own budget, priorities and short-term performance measures. The gaps between these portfolios is often where sensible reform proposals go to die. Whether it's preventive health measures falling between the health and treasury portfolios, or carbon pricing falling between Treasury, environment, climate and industry, because no single minister owns these cross-cutting reforms. And I've got to say, in my short career as an MP, 3.5 years, I've witnessed on many occasions where different ministers, different portfolios act in competition against one another rather than in concert. It's been quite shocking to see. And then third, there's a failure to embed an avoidable cost analysis into budget and policy design. The costs of not acting in areas including health, climate action and poverty reduction are often overlooked and unaccounted for. Research from the Centre for Policy Development has found that Australian governments spend at least $16 billion annually as a result of childhood poverty. Rather than preventing it, we're spending money on addressing it. And up to $29 billion a year on potentially preventable diseases. But these costs of not acting are not adequately accounted for. Likewise, if the government truly accounted for the cost of climate inaction, including the cost of extreme weather damage, higher food and energy prices, and disrupted productivity, the case for strong and urgent climate action would be indisputable. And finally, there's the opposition from entrenched commercial interests and powerful industry lobbies that have repeatedly stored genuine tax reform in this country, from carbon pricing to health taxes, by protecting short-term corporate profits at the expense of long-term public good. Yet, despite these challenges, there are tools and frameworks available to help governments incorporate avoidable cost analyses into decision-making. There's the example of Victoria's Early Intervention Investment Framework, which built prevention directly into the budget process. So departments are required to identify programs that will reduce long-term costs, whether it's in health, justice, housing or education, and funding is set aside to invest in those interventions early. Crucially, outcomes are tracked, using data to monitor the return on investment over time so Treasury can see exactly which interventions are saving money and which ones aren't. This approach changes the incentives and gives departments a reason to think long-term. And importantly, it builds the kind of evidence base that can underpin serious fiscal and tax reform. At the national level, it was exciting to see the Productivity Commission recently recommend a national prevention investment framework to enable governments to invest in and evaluate programs that bring the greatest long-term benefits to individuals and communities. And at the international level, Sweden's social investments funds finance long-term social investments, promoting investment in prevention and innovation. Then there's my Wellbeing for Future Generations bill, which was based on the principle that in meeting the needs of the current generations, we must not compromise the well-being of future generations or their capacity to meet their own needs. So this bill would do three things. It would impose a positive duty on leaders, including politicians and of all public bodies, to actively consider the long-term impacts of their actions. It would appoint an independent commissioner for future generations to represent and safeguard the interests of future Australians, and it would engage citizens in a nationwide conversation, shaping a collective vision for our nation. This national conversation would act as a broad public mandate that gives government the legitimacy and courage to pursue real reform. This bill is heavily based on work that was done in Wales. And back in 2015, Wales introduced the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and they had a commissioner. And following soon after that, they had a national conversation called The Wales We Want. They engaged people for a year across the country, and they came up with 7 wellbeing goals, including in areas of health, sustainability, culture, prosperity, and inclusion. Each department in government and every public body must consider each of these 7 wellbeing goals, not just a single focus, but the whole lot. And they must also not undermine the capacity of other bodies and other portfolios to also meet their goals. And here in Australia, we've actually got some exciting momentum towards having our own national conversation. And I'm pleased to be supporting the launch of the Foundation for Tomorrow's National Conversation discussion paper, along with the other co-chairs of the Friends of Future Generations next week in Parliament. So to build a fairer, more future-focused Australia, we need structural change in our political thinking, our policy settings, and the way we budget and raise revenue. Encouragingly, there are frameworks we can learn from. Victoria's Early Intervention Investment Framework, insights from the Productivity Commission, and importantly, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which would embed a long-term, holistic decision-making framework into our policy making. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and a very special thank you to all our supporters who help keep us running. We're not funded by political parties or fossil fuel companies or government, but by people like you who know the importance of evidence-based research in shaping the critical decisions facing Australia. If you'd like to support us to continue exposing inconvenient truths, challenging vested interests, and explaining the big issues in plain English, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution today. Visit our website australiainstitute.org.au to find out more.